And here we go again. The arrangements have been made thanks to Michelle, and in May 1990 we meet Aunt Catherine at O'Hare International Airport. We fly to Rhine-Main Airport in Frankfurt. We rent a car. We drive down to Chameau to our old resting place, the house of Jean and André Pierre. We then drive over to the cemetery in Dinozé to meet Jean's brother Michel, the one who engineered this whole project. And we meet my brother Dennis there, who had flown in from Chicago. And of course, if we're back with the Jean and Andre family again, and she's visiting the cemetery again, and aware of the dedication of the street that's about to happen, of course Aunt Catherine is on cloud nine. And then this is the first time my brother gets a chance to tour the cemetery and see this amazing piece of real estate that's been set aside to honor the United States war dead. And seeing Dennis at the grave of the father, whom he really didn't get a chance to know very well, I was impressed that his reaction looked to be about the same as mine was the first time I was at that grave. And every time I look at this picture, I realize that standing at the grave of our father with my brother has been one of the more significant emotional experiences of my life. And I was glad my brother Dennis had a chance to share the experience of standing at the graves between my dad and my Uncle Eddie. Standing there with our Aunt Catherine was a very moving experience for him also. And here's our dear friends John and Andre taking in the Duffy family again. We have really come at this time to feel like we're part of their family, and they too have been part of ours. What a blessing. Every time I look at this, I realize it was really a miracle meeting that we had the opportunity to become friends with these people. And here we are pulling into Dinozé again on that bright Sunday morning of Memorial Day, 1990. And how amazing it was to see every home on that street, every home in that town displaying both the flags of France and the United States. I can't believe every town in France would undergo such a display. We were impressed, honored, and humbled. Even the City Hall or the Mayor's office displayed both the tricolor of France and the Stars and Stripes of the United States. And as an additional honor to their American guests, they displayed the American flag and the tricolor flag of Ireland to honor the Irish roots of the Americans, figuring, I suppose, that with the name of Duffy, everyone must come from Ireland, not knowing that Aunt Catherine's mother was born in Germany and she probably doesn't have any Irish blood in her at all. And the flags of his allies during World War II proudly displayed in front of his house. Michel and Françoise certainly went overboard to honor their guests. Michel and Françoise put on a party to end all parties. I only hope they could come to our place in the United States, and I would try as best as we could to reciprocate. I don't think we could do anything that could come close to the marvelous celebration that they prepared for us and our family that day. And of course, with great local wine, and of course there were slabs of fantastic fancy French fromage. And Aunt Catherine was honored to be made a citizen of France. Seeing every home in the village with the flags of France and America proudly displayed was something. When we got to the cemetery and saw over 5,000 of those graves, each with the flag of France and the flag of the United States proudly displayed, was overwhelming. Jean-Pierre and his brother Michel were there so proudly, along with some of Jean's buddies from the 45th Division for this monumental occasion. Well, Memorial Day at this particular U.S. military cemetery in France is really a big deal. It may be so in the other cemeteries, I don't know. As promised, there was an honor guard from the United States Army 3rd Infantry Division from Germany who paraded the road in the cemetery and actually later on up the street to the dedication of the Rue de Frères Duffy. And a unit of French commandos was included in the celebration, and the playing of taps a stirring moment for all the attendees, both the dignitaries, the veterans, and the school children from the village. The graves of my dad and uncle were in for special honors by the members of the village of Dinozé, this day being the day that the street will be renamed or rebaptized in their honor. And now here comes another one of those emotional, miraculous moments. Earlier in this program I mentioned that my grandmother had a little shrine in front of the two pictures of her sons and two secrets boxes full of dirt sent by a couple from France who had been taking care of these graves and sending my grandmother cards and information and pictures since 1950, one or two. The lady in the foreground in the picture, who was an English teacher from Epinal, knew this couple and said, "Did you know the Duffy family will be here today?" The English teacher told them to return in the afternoon, which they did, and we met them. When I was introduced to them, I started bawling. They started bawling. I grabbed their hands. I kissed their hands. I tried to tell them in the best imitation of French I could muster how much I appreciated what they had done and how much joy they brought into my grandmother's life and how much she appreciated them. They showed me all the cards my grandmother had sent them and all the spiritual bouquets and prayers that my grandmother had offered in their behalf in thanksgiving for their care of the graves of her two sons. I tried to assure them how much comfort they brought to the rest of my grandmother's life. And for one more time in this story, I stood there in utter disbelief, wondering, what is God doing for us? And why? And of course, this was another emotionally explosive event for my Aunt Catherine, who was the one who tried to translate the letters that they sent in French for my grandmother. And of course, unfortunately, now that she's gone, I can mention it, my Aunt Catherine's French really wasn't very good. And Helen had a chance to meet Michelle's son, the one who came up on the motorbike 8 years previous to this, who was really the game breaker in this whole story. Had this young man not appeared, there would be no story. The sight that will linger in my memory till my dying day is that of all those crosses and stars of David with the tricolor of France and the stars and stripes of America in front of each one. And then we marched up the street led by a troop of the 3rd Infantry Division, and then they led Aunt Catherine up to the sign to remove the American flag that was covering it, and then she had the privilege of doing the great unveiling. If you've been following the drift of this story, you will understand why every time I look at this slide and see these two French men who are so responsible for making this whole story happen and for honoring the Duffy family as they have, I just keep wondering how we could be so blessed to have two such individuals make such a wonderful, positive impact on our lives and the lives, hopefully, for generations to come. And there are these two marvelous guys, Jean and Michel, holding the sign that they gave to Aunt Catherine as a souvenir of this marvelous day. That's Jean's daughter Sophie next to them, and my brother Dennis holding the flag that was just removed in the unveiling of the street sign. And there in its permanent place is the street sign marking the Rue de Frères Duffy, and it is still there today some 20 years later. And then the mayor and the town council and the citizens of Dinozé hosted a marvelous reception, and the champagne flowed, and there were all kinds of fancy hors d'oeuvres to eat, and the 3rd Division troopers from Germany were there, city officials from Epinal were there, the cemetery staff was there. We met more friends who welcomed us to Dinozé, and I know will continue to welcome us and any member of our family in years to come. And I'm sure that welcome would go to any of the GIs from the 70th Division or the 45th Division, or actually any former American servicemen would be welcome in that town. They just love us. And then the mayor of Dinozé gave a marvelously impressive-looking, impressively sounding speech in French, which I, of course, didn't understand. But then when I read it in English, I realized it was impressive and eloquent. And in reading it in English, I know he expressed the gratitude felt by all the members of Dinozé for the great service that the American GIs provided for them and for the people of France. Gratitude for freeing them from the oppression of Nazi domination. And that sight of the American and French flags decorating every one of those graves is something they repeat every year. It's an annual event. And that monumental day in May of 1990 was the day that Michel and Françoise Pierre-Henri made a move from Rue Malgrange to Rue de Frères Duffy without having to move anything themselves. And years after, in the years before computers anyhow, we would just kind of glow when we would receive his notes or Christmas cards with the Rue de Frères Duffy stamp in the envelope.